So the second day of the Om festival, which was actually New Year's Day, I saw another dozen or so people. And there were a couple of really standout readings in that one. There's quite a diverse range of people at this festival, so from hippies to uh, ravers to, on all sorts of ages. There were young kids and there were people in their 60s and 70s there. So it's quite a diverse demographic. One of the classic ones was this builder who came in and had 5 whorls and fire skin texture, and it was quite obvious from looking at his hand that he was a self-employed builder, and that was sort of a most obvious thing to say about him. And there was one family came through with a father with 2 kids, and that was particularly interesting hand reading too, because so I asked, the kids were interested, and I asked the dad, "Oh, do you want me to look at your child's hands?" And he said, "Yeah, that'd be okay. Okay with that." And they were about 10 years of age or something like that. And clearly he was present, and when I look at the hands of children, if they're interested, I usually just look at the fingerprint patterns and just look at usually just the one fingerprint pattern and talk about one thing on their index finger. And this young girl had a tented arch on her index finger. So I was saying to her dad, "Oh, she's quite intense and she's quite lively, this one, isn't she?" And he goes, "Yes, she is. Yes, she's really." And I said, "Well, what you need to do is you really need to help her keep focused." And I said to her, "So you're on a mission, aren't you? You want to save the world in some kind of way." She said, "Yes, I want to save the whales." She's already got this entire project that she's got underway at school, where she's, wanting to look after the whales, and she's got the whole class involved in this big project, and it's all going up on the classroom walls and so on and so forth. And so she was excited to have this shown in her hand, but I was very able to have a good conversation with the father and say to him, your job is to support this, and explained about how the fire element, if it's channeled, it can be really, really focused and really apply itself. And that's the nature of that particular dermatoglyphic. It's a triangular shaped formation. And fire, when it's focused, it becomes like an oxyacetylene torch and burns through things. So, and obviously a kid is a kid, and a kid can't necessarily do that. So it needs help and scaffolding and guidance, and parents obviously the right person to be doing that. So um, I look forward to bumping into that girl when she's an adult, and hopefully she'll come back and see me some point and tell me how she's getting on. But she had already got this idea that she this idealistic streak of wanting to change the world in some kind of way. For those who don't know, the tented arch is the rarest of the 7 main fingerprint patterns. It occurs on about 4%, 1% of all fingerprint patterns in Caucasians, and about 4% of index fingers. And it's nearly only ever found on the index finger. And don't be confused. It's got to be a tented arch. It's not, the ridges need to go up and over it. If there's any kind of recurving back in any kind of way, it's not a tented arch. It's a loop. Richard Unger, unfortunately, makes that mistake in his book Life Prints, and he misclassifies fingerprint patterns as tented arches when they're in fact loops, just simply because the triradius is centrally located. That's not enough. The central location of the location of the triradius is not as important as the curvature of the ridges around that particular triradius. So don't be confused. It's easy to think you're going to get more tented arches otherwise, but they are actually very rare, but very distinctive. And when you see them, it's a tented arch. Another pair of radial loops on this day as well. It's a couple, a young Swedish man who basically came down and said, I'm very skeptical about this. And I went, okay, but you're here. So never wanted to shirk away from a challenge. And I saw he had bendy thumbs and a loop of seriousness, and a radial loop on his index fingers. And I just went, bam, straight in for it. And it was really, really interesting because he was actually really aware about his pattern. He'd been doing a lot of therapeutic work recently, and he was aware of how his responsive nature. He was aware of how he imbibed things from around him. He was aware of how he emulated the environments that he in, and he was very aware of being unduly influenced by people in the situation. So So literally so I started straight in with that, and I started talking very intensely about the radial loop, and he's like, literally went, you go like, oh my God, you are absolutely talking about everything that I've been thinking about for the last couple of months. It's like, this is entirely what my dilemma in life is all about. And so he was like absolutely blown away. So his skepticism was gone easily swept aside by that kind of approach of going directly into the significant hand feature, in this case, the radial loop on the index finger. And if you don't know about radial loop fingerprint patterns, you really need to learn about them. I mean, if someone has a radial loop fingerprint pattern, it will dominate everything in that person's life. It colors everything. It's one of those features of the hand that if someone has it, kind of has an overriding influence over other factors of the hand. And it's important that you understand that. Otherwise, you'll miss the significance of it. What was interesting was then his partner came for a reading as well, and she also had radial loops on the index fingers. But what was interesting about her is that her reaction was incredibly defensive, which again is a typical um, experience with people with radial loops. Sometimes they're not ready to hear it, or they don't want to hear it, or they think you're being critical, or they receive it as critical. And so the criticality that the sensitivity to criticism that people with radial loops have can actually create a kind of defensive mechanism and a defensive process. And that defensiveness basically is in a pattern by which they can avoid being criticized. So and what that also means is they avoid self-knowledge and they avoid self-recognition. And this couple, he's Swedish, she's New Zealander. They met in Bali a few months ago, and he's come all the way, to live in New Zealand with her because she's the one. Um, and I just like was astounding to hear her resistance to this sort of self-revelation, this self-knowledge, particularly in contrast to his complete openness to it, because he'd been thinking about this particular issue. So I went up to them afterwards, did another reading, and then afterwards they were still sitting around talking. And I went up to them, I said, I really would love you both to listen to each other's recordings, because you will hear your different responses to be talking about the same thing. So I've said the same things pretty much to both of you. There might be some slight variations, but you'll hear the same things, and you've both got the same pattern, but your response to hearing how I presented that to you was completely different. So I just counsel them to say, look, it's really good that you've got each other. There's a vulnerability about this. There's a sensitivity to this that you can work together with. And for goodness sake, basically, he's come all this way to have a relationship with you. So like a little bit of honesty and openness is kind of needs to be forthcoming on your part, I said to her. Anyway, so I hope that kind of helped them in their nascent relationship. And they literally sat around in the glade area for probably an hour and a half, having this conversation in the sun, pursuing these particular themes. So it's a very evident way in which one can have an impactful effect upon, in this case, a couple. Another reading that afternoon, an older woman who'd been drinking, and her palms were like bright red. And I said, can you see that? You see the redness on your palm? That's called palmar erythema. Palmar erythema is a medical diagnostic which basically points to a toxicity in the body that's primarily caused by a malfunctioning of the liver. And there's only two things that really do that, in my experience. One, if someone's heavily medicated, for example, if they're taking prescription drugs, or if they've got some kind of chemotherapy, cancer treatment drugs or something like that, or alcohol. Either way, what it indicates is the liver is overworked. And it was like, so that was kind of like, I'm not going to go any further in this conversation until we've talked about your drinking problem and you need to stop drinking. You can look at your hand, you can see from that the impact that the alcohol is having on your body. And I clarified with her she wasn't on any medication, so it was definitely not that. So it was definitely alcohol. And she actually admitted to me at that point she'd been drinking heavily. Like she drank a couple of bottles of wine. So again, a sort of very easy way to make a very positive effect in people's lives if you know what to look for. And in terms of the sort of medical physiological studies of the hand, that medical literature is really valuable, because there are times when you come across hands with very distinctive symptoms like that, and obviously you can give some person very clear advice and advise them to do certain things or to go and get it checked out and tested by whatever various specialists that they need to see. But yeah, that's something that's kind of important to know about as well. So if you don't know about medical diagnostics from the hand, that's another topic you've got to learn. There's another woman who came. Oh, this was a beautiful one. One of my favorite things, a single whorl on the earth finger with a straight file length airline. So what does that mean? You should know. You should know straight away what that means. That's a very clear indicator of a scientific researcher. And so like, are you a scientific researcher? That's exactly what she was. So one of those kind of ones that you kind of, when you start seeing certain patterns coming into play together, there's a clear indication of what the preoccupations and interests of the person are, and that will lead to kind of jobs that they do and the work that they do. So that's a good one. And then the last reading of the day was kind of an interesting one too. It was a very emotional woman. And emotional for two different reasons. Water skin texture and a simian line. So on the one hand, you've got someone who's incredibly sensitive and very attuned to feeling and very responsive to people, very much feeling into the mood and the atmosphere around people or places or situations, talks very softly and very gently. She's a yoga teacher, actually. But on the inside, is like burning with intensity. She's got a simian line. So there's one part of her that wants the calm, quiet, and stillness that water wants. There's another part of her that's got this incredible tension within her. And that was a really interesting contradiction to discuss with her and to articulate how she experienced herself in these two very different kind of ways, because obviously that creates a problem, because how she wants to be and how she wants the world to be isn't mirrored by how she feels internally. Anyone who's got a simian line is always going to feel that kind of tension or intensity or obsessive nature or obsessive behavior. It's just something kind of quite driven about people with Simian Line. And so you got on the one hand a tendency towards intensity, and on the other page a tendency to calm and rest. And those two things don't sit together very well. But that's the challenge of being a hand reader. The challenge of being a hand reader is to find these apparently contradictory phenomena and articulating their significance as they work together. And our job is to describe them. Their job is to live with them. However difficult it may be to kind of talk about what it'd be like to have a Simian line with a water skin texture, that is nowhere near as difficult as it is to actually live with that pattern. And our job is to try and articulate the nature of that conflict and articulate with words the kind of dialogues that go on inside someone's mind and inside their consciousness about how they are and how they reconcile it. Because how they are and how they reconcile those different impulses is actually descriptive of that person's life. And that describes their life choices, describes their relationship issues, it describes their even the career and the work that they do. Everyone is trying to resolve and work out the mixture of whatever kind of conflict they've got within themselves about whatever tensions there are in their hand. That's what makes each of us as individuals. And if we can help people do that, articulate that, but then we're helping people become aware of different parts of themselves, and by being aware of different parts of themselves, we're helping them to integrate themselves, and that is liberational, and that is transformational, and that leads to self-acceptance, and it leads to joy, and that's why we do hand readings. So fantastic weekend. As I said to a lot of people there, you don't need to take drugs to have a psychedelic experience. Come and have your hands read. There's nothing more psychedelic than hand reading, really. All right, well, I'm off to another festival tomorrow. And this one is one for a week. So I will be doing hand readings there, and I will try and post some things. I'm not sure if we're going to have reception or not. But yeah, my festival season is underway. So I'm busy with festivals right through now, right to the end of March. And I will tell you some stories of people I encounter. And I'll see you again soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And any comments or questions, you can put them in below, and I will address them for you. I look forward to seeing you soon.